Mahadev. So the topic given to me was the nexus, and it is a nexus, mind you, between the Tablighi Jamaat, Pakistan, and China. And looking at how things how does the puzzle fit in, and why we need to be particularly careful about dealing with this situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start first because, there is no such thing as foreign policy. What we have is a whole set of domestic policies, which then become your so-called foreign policy. So what I'm going to show you is what those domestic imperatives are individually of China, then of Pakistan, and then link it into the Tablighi Jamaat, and then also see why the Indic way in particular is under threat from the Tablighi Jamaat specifically. And, the Tablighi Jamaat's kind of Islamism in that sense. So let's start with China. I mean, I don't need to tell all of you that, us and the Chinese just don't get along. There's a whole range of issues. But a lot of people keep saying, that China is going to get ahead technologically of America and things like that. Now, I just want to reassure you that that particular threat is simply never going to happen. And I'll tell you why. You look at the West, let's just call it the Westosphere or Occidentalia, whatever you want to call it. It's a total of about 1.1 billion people. And by that, I'm including Europe, North America, Israel, Australia, Japan, basically America and its entire alliance system. It's 1.1 billion people, and about the average per capita income of the sphere is $43,000 per year. So that's a market of approximately 47 trillion, right? Each individual is worth about $43,000. Now you take China, it's about the per capita income is roughly around $9,000 US. The GDP approximately around there as well. And the complete value of their economy is about, 11-12 trillion dollars. You're looking at a 4:1 gap in terms of the economic sizes. And the size of the economy always matters, number one. This is why the Soviet Union, in spite of all its mathematicians and technological marvel, simply couldn't compete with the United States and NATO as a whole. Second is, remember, per capita income also matters. Why is it that a country like Israel with just 6 million people has 7 million people, has a much greater footprint in the world than a country like, say, Bangladesh or Indonesia, which had about 200 million odd people each? There's a good reason for it. Numbers by themselves don't dictate your geopolitical salience in that sense. So what happens is, understand, a Chinese person, after they've exhausted their yearly need for food, entertainment, so on and so forth, they actually have very little left to invest in personal research. Europe, America, the Westosphere has a lot more to invest in personal research, which is why you will actually see in India, you will seldom, if anything, get Chinese students coming here in their semester year to do primary ground research. It almost never happens because they don't have the money to do it. On the other hand, you will regularly see European, American, Japanese much less so, simply because they're not adventurous. That's a different matter. Australian students come here and learn. So intellectual capital of a 4:1 plus an income differential of 4, sometimes much greater in places like with America versus China, it's almost a 5-6:1 ratio. The personal investment in each individual is much higher. And because you're a democracy and, businesses can just meet, it's not crony capitalism, directed capitalism like China in that sense. The synergies are much, much greater, which is why you see now that China is stuck in a middle income trap. Till about the one good thing that has happened with COVID and me personally was, for the last 3 years, I used to keep telling people, Chinese quality is rubbish, Chinese quality is rubbish. And they'd all say, hey, Abhijit, you're mad, yeah? What are you talking about, yeah? Because, their standard thing was, look at Chinese quality. My OnePlus comes from China. Large parts of the Apple phone come from China and all of that. And then you actually see, remember that all of these quality control measures are at the top. At the bottom level, what you see is the lack of quality control, be it ventilators, be it masks, and this is all low-level things that should have been manufactured to a much greater deal of failure and quality control than the higher level stuff. It's considered natural in most production chains. So you have a China that's basically stuck in a middle income trap. And India's greatest advantage at the moment is the Chinese leadership. Unlike Deng Xiaoping and people who followed him, Xi Jinping is known to be an extraordinarily stupid man. A lot of people even within China tell me, up to a point, from Tiananmen Square onwards, what happened was that, there was no dissent in terms of politics, but you could always dissent in terms of economics. You could always recommend different paths and things like that. It was always a dangerous business, but it was allowed. With Xi Jinping, nobody is allowed to comment anymore. Now, remember, the greatest genius of a democracy isn't that it acts as a pressure valve that you can kick out a government when you're fed up with it. It's that it acts as an early warning system. It tells you when people are disaffected. It tells you when things are going wrong. And that is the main advantage that a democracy has, where it's able to protect itself. This is not happening with Xi Jinping. Now, why did I give you this entire background? It's to bring us to his pet project, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, what used to be called the One Belt, One Road. So what basically Xi Jinping has done is, because he's seen that China is stuck in a middle income trap, he's going on this big expansion of infrastructure, believing very mistakenly that infrastructure leads to economic growth. Now it does not. Now, I don't know how many of you live in Delhi, but if you live in Delhi, the clearest example of how infrastructure does not lead to economic growth is the Delhi-Gurgaon, that national highway out there, right? It made life easier, but it did not lead to economic growth, because economic growth is based on other things. It's based on your labor laws. It's based on your investment law. It's based on your regulatory mechanisms, on your judicial and law enforcement reliability and consistency, none of which we have in this country, by the way, and therefore things can't grow properly. Simple example, Delhi Airport. GMR didn't actually make their profit. Of course, they made a big profit building the Delhi Airport, corrupt means and all of that. Let's not get into that. But where they made most of their money was the land adjacent to the airport, that airport city and things like that, which they sat on for 10, 12 years and then sold at a massive, massive profit when everybody thought the economy was going up about 5, 6 years back, when it was in fact, more about 7, 8 years back when it was actually booming. That's when they sold it for a huge profit, and that's where they made all their money. So infrastructure does not lead to growth. Now let's look at where these trade routes are growing. Central Asia. Now you tell me Asia extensively for about 60 days totally. That includes everything: Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. And I'm yet to see one proper value addition economic activity out there. The one place that I saw was in Uzbekistan, where the IL-76, it's this big Russian transport plane, is manufactured, which is an extremely obsolete design. China has come up with a new design. Even Russia is coming up with a new design. And then there was all the oil and gas in Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. Outside of that, you literally have, you don't have the market size, and you don't have the innovation for those centers to either become consumers or to become exporters in any sense of that word. Then you come down to Iran and Pakistan. And again, CPEC, look at the investment in CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is something like $90 billion. Now, what are you going to do for $90 billion? You can invest it, but what is the returns you're going to get out there? America, for example, over the years has invested close to about $45, $60 billion in Pakistan. What was the economic gain from there? Did it dampen down terrorism? No. Did it create more economic growth? No. In many ways, what you're looking at is an extremely hastily conceived plan which was wrapped in crony capitalism. The point was to give businesses to use China's surplus to give business to Chinese construction companies, to Chinese infrastructure companies, in the belief that somehow in the next 20 to 30 years, this will create some kind of a boom in China. It will create a boom, but the end of the boom of an unsustainable boom like that is bust. In many ways, you see what China's obor is doing is exactly what the Soviet economy did under Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and all of that. So it is going to go bust because at every single, and we meet the Chinese about twice a year. I mean, I meet the Chinese about twice a year in some forum or the other. For the last 5 years, I've been asking them, can you please show me a cost benefit analysis? And, we sit down and we literally do a 3rd-degree torture grilling of them on obor, on cost benefit, on seeing where things come out of it. Nothing ever comes out of it. This is the financial side, which then ties them into Pakistan. So remember, no matter how problematic Pakistan becomes for them, they need Pakistan right now. They've created, so we may think that Pakistan is dependent on China, but China is equally dependent on Pakistan for that $90 billion construction boom to happen. It is in for the benefit of Pakistan. Never make the mistake of thinking that Chinese investment is the benefit of the recipient country. It never is. It is always Chinese investments everywhere are for the benefit of China and China alone. It is all being done by Chinese companies. And it is basically creating some kind of an artificial bubble in China. Even in China, you find there is a complete mismatch to the quality of construction and the rate of income. Now, one of my friends she lives in a slum of Beijing, and she's a researcher and very well educated, but she can only afford to live in a slum. So I asked her, what gives? I mean, she's paying about $500 a month. $500 to live in a one-room, literally in a room, 10 feet by 10 feet. It doesn't even have a bathroom attached to it. She has to walk 500 meters in one direction to use the public showers and about 50 meters in another direction to use the public toilets. So imagine $500 is what you're paying for a room per month in Beijing, where your national average income is about $9,000 to $10,000 kind of thing. Which is why when you go to Beijing, you'll see after about 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 90% of the flats are dark because there's nobody occupying the flats even in Beijing. They've all moved to the outskirts of town, and the huge jams on the outskirts of town with people trying to come in because there is this fundamental mismatch. They are setting up their economy for a huge, huge fail. The issue is we don't know when it's going to fail. This is the economic side. Keep this in mind because we'll weave this into the later part of the analysis. Then we come to their foreign policy. Now, their foreign policy and their defense policy, if obor is one side and it marks some kind of a change, their traditional stance historically has been that they do not like allies. They believe that allies bring both assets and liabilities. And this in a way is actually smart policy. This, unlike their economics, is where they're actually quite smart. Now, if you remember, the Soviet Union had all kinds of bizarre allies like Cuba or Zimbabwe, Syria, Egypt, that went on having their own political agendas. They'd go off on wars, and then they'd require Russia to come in and try to save them somehow or the other. Which expended a lot of Soviet resources. You see the same thing happening with America, for example. You have tiny little countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland, whose one-point agenda since day one has been Russia hate, Russia hate, Russia hate. And they've successfully undone the Cold War rapprochement. So it went from America, Russia getting along, and now thanks to these 4 countries plus Ukraine, Russia and America don't get along anymore. So, in that sense, this Chinese view towards assets and liabilities is extremely important. What they believe instead is creating rogue actors. And what do these rogue actors do? They love giving these tiny little high risk states the means to defend themselves as long as they are willing to be extremely provocative and bog down the region. So 2 classic examples of this are North Korea and Pakistan. And each one of them has got nuclear weapons through the Chinese angle in one form or the other. The Chinese have masked it very well, but make no mistake about it, it has come purely because of China. And what have the consequences of all of this been? That they have basically gone around creating havoc in the region. North Korea has bogged down South Korea, it has bogged down Japan, to the extent that neither of these countries are even looking at a role beyond that particular region. Number one. Number two, in Pakistan, you can see Pakistan is a source of all kinds of trouble. Pakistan successfully bogged down the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They bogged us down for a very, very long time, unable to do more, which is why we came up with this SAARC -1 policy, which is all of SAARC except Pakistan. The only country, surprisingly, that has managed to out-diplomatize or outfox the Chinese was Burma. And we don't know how or why they do this. But, they always act, we're very close to you. We're getting great China. Thank you very much, la-di-da-di-da. And suddenly when the break comes, when you give them some kind of leeway to move away, they just do it spectacularly. So they'd given China the contract to build a dam in the north. They just canceled the dam when they made up with America, Britain, France, and all of that. They just canceled the contract completely and moved out. And the Chinese were like, what did we do? So the Burmese have actually learned how to play the Chinese, and the Burmese, surprisingly, don't destabilize the region. Let's not take the Rohingya crisis. That's sort of a different matter. We'll discuss that during the Q&A. So this has been the Chinese ball game. Destabilize the region, a fairly robust foreign policy on one hand, and on the other, you have a fairly, in my opinion, very dumb economic policy, though most other people that you will talk to who have come in this lecture series will tell you Abhijit is quite mad. It's actually the opposite. Their foreign policy isn't very good. Their economic policy is extremely good. Now let's get to Pakistan. Pakistan, I'm not going to take too long on Pakistan because you all know what the problem with Pakistan is. It's completely unsustainable at the moment. We know this Chinese investment of $90 billion is not going to produce any kind of economic activity. In fact, I personally don't speak Chinese, but I have lots of colleagues who do. And we've been seeing a steady crescendo of extraordinarily harsh language come out in Chinese language journals about Pakistan. They're saying every single project under CPEC is being stalled in some form or the other. It is being undermined in one way or another. There are security issues. There are land clearance issues. There are land acquisition issues, all kinds of things. And one of the reasons is when we talk to the Pakistanis in private during our nuclear track 2 dialogues, they tell us, look, I think we got our balance wrong. Before it used to be, it was like that typical jealous woman. You got two lovers, America and China, and you're saying, do you love me more? Then buy me a Mercedes. Do you love me more? Then buy me a Ferrari. And you know what? Basically what's happened is America's basically said, Hyundai Eon, if you don't like it, well, too bad. And China has said, okay, I'm going to buy you the Rolls Royce. But see, you never intended to commit to the Rolls Royce in the first place. You were always wanted to play neither here nor there and play one off against the other. Now they're feeling trapped. They feel they don't have the American anchor anymore. The Chinese have invested so much. What are we going to do? We're going to have, and remember, the Chinese are not like the Americans. They will not cajole and try to co-opt you. The Americans never force you to do things. The Chinese, on the other hand, will call Bajwa or Imran Khan to Beijing and just tell him, you are going to do this. There is no question then that they have to end up doing it. The Chinese are not very nice about these things. And we're already, and I don't claim to know the people of Pakistan, but I do know a lot of the elites of Pakistan. They're very good friends of mine. The amount of fear that they have of the Chinese is just unbelievable. And in many ways, what I find is that the Indian public discourse, instead of playing up these fears, we actually keep bonding them together. Instead of playing divide and rule, instead of dividing our enemies, we keep multiplying our enemies in a sense, which is never a good strategy. you should always encourage these people to keep fighting. Because like I say, but the good thing is it's a win-win strategy. It doesn't matter which way it goes for us. Pakistan is basically screwed if it goes with China or if it doesn't go with China. So like I always say, Pakistan deserved the Chinese and the Chinese deserve Pakistan in the sense. If you want to get into any of the details, we'll do that during the Q&A session. But basically what is happening now is the Chinese are particularly worried about terrorism. They were very happy with terrorism as long as it was directed towards India. They are not happy with terrorism that cannot be controlled and keep getting directed towards India and keeps refracting onto their investments in Pakistan. Now, the problem, of course, is like we all know, with our own experiences in Sri Lanka of feeding the LTTE, and then Mrs. Indira Gandhi basically bolstering up Bhindranwale as a counter to the Akalis, we all know terrorism is simply not a controllable commodity. If it were controllable, it would not be terrorism in that sense. So what happens is the Chinese now are caught in a fix. Even within the Chinese leadership, from what we've been hearing for the last almost 2-3 years now, is that some background. About 4 years back, we heard that the Chinese had accepted the fact that terrorism was uncontrollable in a sense, and they had accepted the cost of it. But then we suddenly, which is why we thought that CPEC was not going to go ahead. It was just a paper commitment, like a lot of China's commitments are. But suddenly we see it going ahead. And now we have 3-monthly and 6-monthly meetings where they keep assessing. There is a huge push-pull happening in the Chinese system where they don't know, is terrorism against India more important to keep it down? Or is Chinese economic investment in Pakistan more important? I can tell you in the end, it's going to come down to terrorism against India is more important, because they're going to realize in about 15 to 20 years that that investment isn't going to yield any dividends or fruit or anything like that. And if you look at the naval path of Obor, basically every port to break even for a ship to stop there needs to have an economic hinterland of about $30 to $80 billion. That is not the case with most. 90% of the Obor ports are in the about $3 to $15 billion hinterland, economic hinterland region. So, there's no way any of the port systems can also break even. But what I've told you with Pakistan is kind of the cost benefit analysis happening in China across the board. So on one hand, you have Pakistan that is feeling trapped between China and, well, feels that it's gotten too deep into the Chinese trap. In private, the Pakistanis also admit that terrorism has become much bigger. They never thought it would get so big. They always thought they could control it. And now they basically don't know how to get out of this. If they crack down, they'll basically implode as a state. If they don't crack down, they're going to implode as a state. They don't know how to get out of it. Now, notice what I'm giving you is basically, it's like those horrible, I like horror movies that have a proper ending, where good triumphs over evil, and that's it. I don't like those horror movies where the ghost makes a comeback and it's left for part 2, part 3. Unfortunately, what you're going to notice here is that in both with China between foreign policy and economics, it's left at a very uncomfortable place where China itself hasn't decided. And with Pakistan also, we're leaving it at a very uncomfortable place where Pakistan hasn't decided. They are caught in this China trap, plus in this terrorism trap that they don't know how to get out of right now. Now, please don't mistake when I say they want to get out of it as in they have any milk of human kindness towards India. They want to kill all Indians, never never doubt that. But having problems and analyzing them in order to destroy them is very different from feeling sympathy from them, for them. Remember that. Then we come to the Tablighi Jamaat. Now, in the Tablighi Jamaat, what we have to see is this is basically from the Deoband school. The biggest opposition is the Barelvi school. They are, in a sense, Salafists. Salafist is that they want to go back to the way the Prophet lived in 1,400 years back. But unlike Wahhabis, now Wahhabis consider themselves to be the true Salafis, and they hate the Tablighis. The Wahhabis and the Kharijites are the sect in Oman. They are basically puritanical, which is they allow for modernism. They don't need an absolute textual following. But the Tablighis are not puritanical, they are traditionalists. They will say the Prophet always slept on his right, therefore you must always only sleep on your right. You can't sleep on your back, you can't sleep on your chest. Because the Prophet did this, the ideal thing is you should only sleep on the right side of your shoulder. It doesn't matter ki shoulder mein arthritis hai, you still have to sleep on the right side of your shoulder. Prophet said keep a beard. He never mentioned a mustache. Therefore, we must. So one of the things about Tablighis, you'll see they don't have a mustache. They only have a beard, which I think looks really weird. But, you know, I mean, I'm nobody to comment on people's fashion. Being 108 kgs fat, I don't think I can be a fashion commentator. Then they have all these funny rules. You know, when you enter the bathroom, it must be the left foot first. Highly, to the point that it also repels a lot of more sophisticated. If you actually look at Wahhabi jurisprudence, it's become a lot more sophisticated in keeping with the times and technology, whereas Tablighi jurisprudence has not become so refined. It's still at a very low, rudimentary level. You know, eat with your right hand. Do not use a fork and knife. They have restrictions against forks and knives as well. You have to only eat with the three, with your thumb, your index finger, and your middle finger, and all of that. So small things. And this is one of the reasons that the Wahhabis actually hate the Tablighis. However, and this is very, very important, the main reason we consider Tablighis to be, not innocent, but in a sense innocent, is that they don't get involved in politics. True and not true. You know, in that sense, it's like how the Sinn Féin and the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, were. The Irish Republican Army used to do all the bombings, but the Sinn Féin used to be the peaceful political face of it. Oh, the Sinn Féin never does political bombings. 80% of all terrorists in France came from the Tablighi Jamaat in one way or another, right? In America, it's a lesser figure, about 60% or something like that. But all these people have come, they've used the Tablighi Jamaat as a sort of nursery for terror, but they don't do terrorism while they're in the Tablighi Jamaat. Why? Because, you know, it's like crime. Crime is fungible. One form of crime leads to another form of crime, criminality. It's like that, one form of fundamentalism, and there's a very rudimentary form of fundamentalism. When you want to go beyond this, because there is no room for politics within the Tabligh, direct politics. The leaders play a lot of politics. That's a different matter, but it's all kept hidden. They move on towards, they just outgrow it. It's like the Tabligh was my nursery. Now I need to go to middle school or senior school or I know, Jihad University or something like that. So then they'll graduate onto Harkatul Mujahideen and things like that. One of the mistakes that we make is, you know, we look at it from, there's the Indic point of view of a nation state. You know, we don't have this, everybody says, oh, you have caste. Remember, we've never actually had this concept of saying you are not one of us. Muslims and Christians were very clear, you are. There's substance and salience. What makes up a nation? It's substance and salience. Substance is what connects you and me. Salience is what says, you are not me. You stay outside. We have never really had that. We've never had this concept of you are not one of us. We had a concept of impurity, that if you crossed the 7 seas and came back, you were impure and then had to be purified. But once you were purified, you were still accepted as part of this country and all of that. So we've never been able to identify what is a foreigner, which is why we've always had the concept of Bharat as a entity, but we've never been able to politically define it in the clearest sense. I know a lot of you are going to quote that shloka in the Puranas, what is south of the, what is north of the seas and south of the Himalayas and all of that. But remember, there's a big difference between having a historiographical sense of what India is and a political sense of what India is. And we've never had, and a political sense of India is not just saying what is India geographically, it is also saying what is India ethnically and what is not India ethnically. All right, the Persians, when they split from us as an old Vedic people, the Persians were Vedic. They developed of that sense of who is not us. Because, when the Sapta Sindhu dried up, they were very clear that we are the Asura worshippers. We will not worship the Devas. The Devas are evil. So that concept of evil was very clear in their heads. Because we weren't the ones that split. We were the original religion. We've never had that notion that they are not us. Now, compare this with Christianity, where its entire notion of the political state starts off in Westphalia in the 1600s, the Treaty of Westphalia and the Westphalian Treaty State, which is either linguistically based or something like that. However, Islam, in the sense, truly, their concept of a nation state was the first sort of Marxist conception of a nation state in that sense. They always saw it as a pan-national identity, that Islam is the nation. All right. So when somebody says that a Muslim is loyal to his country, mostly, yes, if he isn't really immersed in his religion, he is. But if he is immersed in his religion, the concept of Indianness as you or me see it, which is we understand what is an Indian and what is not Indian, they don't see that nation state. It's a supranational identity, and it is always perpetually playing on their minds. Now, Pakistan knows how to play this very, very, very well. They don't need the Tablighi Jamaat to be political. They don't need any Indian Muslim organization to be political. They can use them irrespective of their politics. Now, was this particular COVID transmission, was it a political act? No. But remember, at the base of it is a lot of accumulated hate, or a lack, I won't say hate, but a lack of love for India. Let's put it that way. A lack of respect for authority. And why do we say this? Because Islam, unlike Christianity, has industrialized. When we talk about Christianity, we have to make a difference between northern, as in north of the Mason-Dixie line Christianity, south of the Mason-Dixie line Christianity. North of the Mason-Dixie line was, it became industrialized and, turn the other cheek kind of Christianity. In the southern part of America, which was completely devastated by the Civil War, never recovered till about 10, 15 years back, which is when the real growth of southern United States started, was still in that old an eye for an eye, Old Testament Christianity. You look at Christianity in Uganda, it's very different from Christianity in Europe. Christianity in Europe is very liberal to the point it's almost become irrelevant, right? Nobody actually goes to church anymore. But Christianity in Uganda, the more backward the place, the more violent their form of Christianity is. And this is what we sometimes get confused, because we don't actually go study the theological components of Christianity. We don't understand. Now, I know we had this chat in Vadodara, Giridaji, but one of my big complaints about the Indic way of studying things has always been that we assume that our paradigms are the paradigms that everybody follows. We mostly follow the law. If the government says it, we'll throw a tantrum, but then we'll follow it. Not everybody's like that. So understand, when you find something like this, you have to go into their theology. Now, how does this all mix together? Understand, you have, I hate to use this word, but we have 1,000 different fifth columns operating in here. And between, as long as Pakistan and China had a clear path forward, you understand how these hundreds of different organizations within India will be used against you. As long as Pakistan is unsure of its way forward, and its master, increasingly dependent master, China, is unsure of its way forward, we have absolutely no idea how it's going to be used against us. Now, I'm coming to the end of my 40 minutes, so I'm just going to quickly give you the Indian perspective on this. Just give me 5 more minutes. I have absolutely no love for the Prime Minister right now, so excuse me for being terribly harsh about this. But what I've seen consistently is, understand the glory of India It all came due to a Chanakyan economic model of absolute empowerment of the individual. Remember, socialism is a Buddhist invention, capitalism is a Hindu invention. We have seen this in the Maurya Empire. Chandragupta Maurya, through Kautilya, was the arch capitalist. The state would do nothing. If you wanted a bridge, if there was demand and supply, the local guilds would get together and build a bridge, and that is what would happen. His successor followed that path. The moment Ashoka comes in, this whole nonsense of Devanam Piya Piyadasi, it was literally in every, I am the father of my people. He was literally started the concept of the Mai Baap state. And people don't realize this. The Maurya Empire didn't fall after Ashoka died. The Maurya Empire started collapsing during Ashoka's time. 20 years after Ashoka died, we all hear about the Kalinga battle and him going and sacking Bhuvaneshwar. Nobody tells you that King Kharavela, 20 years after Ashoka, came and sacked and burnt Patliputra. Have any of you heard about that? These are the benefits of being in jail in Odisha. See, you get to learn lots of these things about Odia history. So what happens here is, you must remember, if you are Indic and if you are Hindu, socialism is the greatest form of violence. The Hindu is an individualistic culture. We celebrate individuality. That doesn't mean we're predatory individuals like Western capitalism. We're like Calvinists or Jains in that sense, who accumulate great wealth, but we put it for the greater common good. We use it for the public. And that is why we have our entire system of philosophy and morality. Now, what we've done is, we've got a completely socialist economic paradigm. And remember, socialism will be the death of Hindus. We are not moving away from socialism. We're doubling down from socialism. And as long as we remain in socialism, we cannot compete with China economically, number one. Number two, there is a whole range of security issues happening. There is no serious, defense is seen almost as some kind of afterthought. It's never seen as the primary goal of this government. So, even the way defense contracts are given out, it's almost as if, I mean, since Ramayana is happening right now on Doordarshan, you must have seen how, people come and say, Maharaj ki jai ho, aapka beta hua hai. And Maharaj is very happy and he removes that mala and puts it on the ladies or the guy's neck. This is how defense contracts are being given. They're based on the political preference of your country and partner and things like that, which is important. Again, we'll get into the nuance during the conversation. We're not doing well economically. Security, we are lagging behind. Sometimes I really, really worry we're getting to a stage where things are getting very bad. And for me, the final straw really was the NSA going to the Tablighi Jamaat headquarters for a whole range of issues. See, when somebody behaves badly, you don't reward them for it. This is one of the things you learn during dog training. When your dog runs away from you, you never slap the dog when it comes back to you. It doesn't matter what the dog has done. When it comes back to you, say, good boy, and you give it a bone to eat. Why? Because you want to reinforce good behavior. Here, what they've done is they've gone on defying you repeatedly. You send the NSA there, which is, first of all, bad security management. Second, remember, the Prime Minister doesn't launch a nuclear attack in India. It is the NSA on the orders of the Prime Minister who launches the nuclear attack. You have literally sent your nuclear command authority into a building that was full of disease, into a biologically infected area. And I can tell you, all the nuclear security boards were groups. There's a whole bunch of nuclear scholar WhatsApp groups. I know some sounds something really geeky and weird, like, Chess Masters International Group or Illuminati International Group, but we actually have these nuclear strategies groups. We were aghast that you're sending the man who launches your nuclear weapons into a biologically active zone. You don't know what's going to happen to him. So there were a whole range of issues to deal with this thing, which didn't come off very well. So I'm going to end there. I'm sorry, I've taken up more than my fair share of time, but I'm sure we can tie the threads through when we get into the Q&A.
Thanks.